1964. Dwight D. Eisenhower, retired now, sits down with historian Stephen Ambrose, who's recording material for a biography. Ambrose has done this kind of interview before. Generals talk about other generals, tanks, air power, the big calls that moved armies across a continent. So when he asks Eisenhower who actually won the war, he's expecting a name he already knows. Instead, Eisenhower names a boat builder from New Orleans. According to Ambrose's own account of the conversation, Eisenhower said, "Andrew Higgins is the man who won the war for us." No recording of that exchange survives, no transcript from the time. What we have is Ambrose's recollection, since repeated by the National WWII Museum and by historians who treat it as credible. Ambrose says, Eisenhower kept going. If Higgins hadn't designed and built those landing craft, the Allies could never have landed over an open beach, and the whole strategy of the war would have looked different. That's the man who ran DDAY, putting a boat builder above his own commanders. So who was Higgins? Nothing about his childhood pointed there. Born in Columbus, Nebraska, August 28, 1886, his father, a lawyer and local judge, died in a fall when Andrew was 7, and the family struggled after that. They moved to Omaha. He wasn't a good student and was expelled before graduating, reportedly for fighting. By his biographer's account, he was already running a small lawn-cutting business as a kid, and he got fixated on the Missouri River, a stretch of water full of shallow spots and submerged snags that wrecked ordinary boats. The story goes that he built his first shallow draft boat in the family basement and had to tear out part of the wall to get it outside, then put the wall back before his mother got home. Can't verify that one independently, but it shows up in every account of his early life. He never went to a naval academy. He took a correspondence course in naval architecture instead, worked in lumber and boat building in Alabama, then Louisiana, and in 1930 started a small company in New Orleans called Higgins Industries. What he actually built were boats for oil drillers and trappers working the swamps and bayous of the Mississippi Delta, water so shallow and choked with debris that a normal hull didn't survive it. His fix was recessing the propeller into a tunnel built into the hull so it wouldn't ground out or foul. He called it the Eureka boat. Nothing military about it. It just kept a trapper's engine in one piece. By 1938, the Marine Corps had a problem Higgins didn't even know he'd solved. The Navy's own landing craft kept failing shallow water tests, and Higgins wasn't shy about saying so, reportedly telling anyone who'd listen that the Navy didn't know the first thing about small boats. As the dispute over landing craft design reached Washington, Senator Harry Truman's committee investigating national defense took an interest in Navy procurement, and its scrutiny helped push the Navy off its own design. When Higgins's Eureka boat was finally tested head-to-head against the Navy's craft, it clearly outperformed it. The one flaw was disembarking. Troops had to climb over the sides, exposed the whole time. Higgins learned that Japanese forces had used landing craft with a bow ramp during the 1937 invasion of China, a detail passed along by Marine officer Victor Krulak, who'd seen the design himself near Shanghai. Higgins had a ramp bow prototype built and tested on Lake Pontchartrain within weeks. It worked. The design became the LCVP, Landing Craft, Vehicle, Personnel. Nobody called it that. Everyone called it the Higgins Boat. One more story from around the same time, told in nearly every Higgins biography, though, like the basement story, nobody can pin it down with certainty. The Navy wanted a craft that could land a tank, not just troops. Higgins told them not to bother sending a design. He'd build a working boat instead. The Navy said it couldn't be done in the time they had. Higgins is said to have shot back, "The hell it can't," and had a prototype tank lighter built in 61 hours. That craft became the basis for the LCM, the landing craft, mechanized, built to carry tanks and artillery instead of riflemen. Here's the part the German High Command never really reckoned with. In 1938, Higgins Industries had fewer than 75 people in a single boatyard. By late 1943, across 7 plants in New Orleans, he had more than 20,000 workers. At peak, output ran above 600 boats a month. By war's end, his company alone had built over 20,000 boats, about 12,500 of them LCVPs, with total wartime LCVP production across all manufacturers topping 23,000. The company won the Army-Navy Award, the military's top honor for a war contractor, more than once. He ran his factories the same way he'd run every job before it. His workforce was one of the first major racially integrated industrial workforces in New Orleans. White men, black workers, women, older workers, workers with disabilities, all on the payroll, and the company insisted on equal pay for equal work. In the segregated Deep South, in the middle of the war, he hung banners over the factory floor reading, "The guy who relaxes is helping the Axis." A 1942 profile quotes him saying, "I operate in a big way and I don't give a damn about money." American papers at the time credited him with the nickname the New Noah. Whether that ever actually came from Hitler, as the story often gets told, isn't something the record backs up. On paper, the boat seemed almost ordinary. 36 feet long, 11 feet wide, plywood over a wooden frame, a 225 horsepower diesel engine, 9 to 12 knots. It carried 36 combat-equipped infantrymen, or a jeep and 12 men, or about 8,000 pounds of cargo, and still floated in 3 feet of water. Barely any protection from gunfire, not fast. What it did was solve one enormous problem. It let an army land on an open beach instead of having to take a fortified port first. Marine Corps historian Colonel Joseph Alexander later put it plainly, writing that the Higgins boat broke the gridlock on ship-to-shore movement and that it's hard to overstate the tactical advantage it gave American commanders in the war. Higgins boats carried troops ashore during Operation Torch in North Africa in 1942, carried Marines onto Guadalcanal, carried soldiers into Italy, carried MacArthur back onto Philippine soil in October 1944, in the photo everyone's seen. On June 6, 1944, they put the first waves of American soldiers onto Omaha and Utah beaches, part of a landing that got roughly 160,000 Allied troops ashore in France. In the first day, large numbers of the American assault infantry that morning came off a Higgins boat, not a warship. They carried American forces across the Rhine in March 1945. In the Pacific, the same basic design carried Marines onto Iwo Jima and Okinawa. A boat built for swamp trappers ended up shaping how America fought a war on two oceans. Which brings us back to Ambrose's account of that room in 1964. Eisenhower wasn't handing out a polite compliment to a defense contractor. He was pointing at the one design choice that made his own strategy possible. Historians generally agree that without something like the Higgins boat, Allied amphibious operations would have been far harder, and both the European and Pacific strategies would likely have looked different. Normandy, the island-hopping campaign across the Pacific, a lot of how this war actually got fought, traces back to a design that started as a fix for trappers losing engines to submerged logs. Higgins died August 1952 at 65. His company didn't outlast him by much. Government contracts dried up once the war ended, and Higgins Industries was gone within a few years. Most people never learn his name in school. There's a road named after him in New Orleans, a modest memorial, and a Higgins boat on display at the National WWII Museum, built by volunteers, some of whom had worked in his factories decades earlier. Ambrose's Eisenhower wasn't talking about a machine, he was talking about a man who decided, on his own, where an army was allowed to land, and that's a strange kind of power for a boat builder from Nebraska to end up holding. If this kind of history is worth keeping around, stick with the channel. There's more of it.